I'm Scott MacDonald. I'm a regional analyst here at Intelligence Fusion, where I also function as the subject matter expert for Ireland. And today I'm going to be talking to you about Northern Ireland and the impact of Brexit. Brexit's a problem for Northern Ireland because back in 1998, all parties kind of established that there would be no hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland to ensure free travel of people and goods. The problem in Northern Ireland now is that with the UK's withdrawal from the European Union, that would automatically re-establish the hard border infrastructure. So what they've had to do is establish a compromise which has become known as the Northern Ireland Protocol, which substitutes that hard border infrastructure for an imagined border through the Irish Sea. How that works in practice is that any goods coming into Northern Ireland from the rest of the UK will be subject to inspection when it gets to the ports in Northern Ireland, for example, where it can stay in the country or it can progress onwards to the Republic. The reaction has been mixed across Northern Ireland between the two communities, Republicans, Nationalists and the Loyalist community. I think the initial knee-jerk reaction was fury on both counts. So the Republican Nationalist community is extremely annoyed, essentially being dragged out of the European Union, which they're largely in favour of, whereas the Loyalist community is also equally furious because the Northern Ireland Protocol, the compromise that was reached, is seen as almost literally cutting them off from the rest of the UK, where a large part of that community's identity is drawn from. So both sides are almost equally furious. It's manifested itself in different ways. So the Republican Nationalist community, while quite angry, we've not seen as much violent reaction from them. I think at the heart of that lies the idea that there's possibly a good opportunity to advance talks and maybe even the implementation of reunification between Northern Ireland and the Republic. Whereas here at Intelligence Fusion, we've been mapping an awful lot of increase in terms of violence and disorder from the Loyalist community across Northern Ireland, whether that be in the form of protests or outright violence from the typically Loyalist communities across the country, but also kind of specifically centred on the major population centres of Derry, Londonderry and Belfast. So from the Republican Nationalist community, you'll see groups such as the INLA, the Irish National Liberation Army, in various guises of the Irish Republican Army, whether that be the Provisionals, the Real Continuity, so they're all still active. In terms of the Loyalist community, you will see the Ulster Volunteer Force, the UVF, as well as the UDA, the Ulster Defence Association, as I say, also very much active. And we're still seeing kind of typical activities from them. One of the strange hallmarks of paramilitary activity in Northern Ireland is punishment, beatings and shootings, which is a strange kind of system that works on a kind of appointment system, as in you've done something to offend the paramilitaries and you are told to appear and present yourself at a certain time and place, or you'll receive a beating or a shooting, and it's typically in the leg around about the kneecap area. So these activities are still going on. And that's kind of the hallmark traits of violence in Northern Ireland. So alongside these kind of typical activities, which we're still seeing quite a lot of, as well as IEDs, Northern Ireland probably the most active place across the continent in terms of either real IED activity or hoaxes. Quite a trademark activity is a hoax IED, which is designed to draw in emergency services, the police, for example. So the ID itself is a fake, but at which point when the police arrive, they will be shot at, or a second, IED will go off near the scene. Quite recently, actually, we've also seen a police officer targeted. IED was found underneath their vehicle, and another case where an IED hoax had been placed. The police show up, and then there was indications that shots were taken at a police helicopter, responding to the incident. So alongside these kind of bread and butter normal situations for Northern Ireland, we're seeing a change in targeting. We're seeing people linked to Brexit being specifically targeted. So politicians, kind of responsible for the talks and implementation of Brexit, as well as people such as transport infrastructure. So specifically the port workers dotted around Northern Ireland, so Larne, for example, We're seeing quite a lot of threats being issued, graffiti, outrightly saying, you constitute a legitimate target because of where you work and what you're doing, and things like that. So in response to that, I think the dock workers, port workers had actually stopped any kind of checks for a period of time a few months ago, just because it was simply unsafe for their workers to continue and going about the job. The problem is that the Paramilitaries can only kind of push that so far. The transport infrastructure, such as the port system, is vitally important for the Paramilitaries in getting narcotics into the country. Paramilitaries are heavily pushing narcotics because it's a means to fund their organisations, recruiting members, acquisition of firearms and so on. So although they're pushing hard on these key sector workers, I'd be surprised if they pushed it all the way to the end result, simply because they actually, at the end of the day, they rely on them on getting narcotics into the country. So in terms of politics, the most interesting thing that's going on at the moment is a complete meltdown within the loyalist leadership. The Democratic Unionist Party, for example, First Minister and leader of the party, Arlene Foster, has been ousted, replaced in turn by Edwin Poots as leader and Paul Given as First Minister. They in turn are now out or on the way out to be replaced by Sir Geoffrey Donaldson. I think the loyalist community is completely floundering, looking for a united response to Brexit and the Northern Ireland Protocol. All this coming after a long hiatus at the Northern Ireland Assembly, basically didn't exist for nearly 3 years. The most recent Westminster election returned a nationalist majority for the first time ever, and more recently the Republic, the elections to the Dáil, the Sinn Féin actually won the popular vote. So you're faced with an interesting situation where a nationalist majority in Westminster elections for the first time, Sinn Féin, still widely recognised as the political arm of the IRA, winning the popular vote in the Republic, and now the possibility of a nationalist majority in the Northern Ireland Assembly. Very interesting to see where that goes in terms of if you can get 3 for 3, then talks of a united Ireland could be very much on the table, which has the potential for immense instability across the region. I think we might see an upsurge in violence as we come into July. The 11th night, bonfires and kind of typical low-level disorder across the province. And the following day, the 12th, the glorious 12th, commemorating the Glorious Revolution. I think the uncertainty in the community, coupled with the fact of the COVID-19 pandemic, these celebrations have been kind of suppressed recently. The police, who have the unhappy task of enforcing COVID-19 lockdowns, are obviously going to be tasked with keeping law and order at these events. I think there's the large potential for violence in response. I think the potential for conflict is massive, but on the other hand, you've got an entire generation, 1998, you had an entire generation growing up knowing relative peace and stability in Northern Ireland. And we've seen recent examples, the shooting, the murder of journalist Lyra McKee, for example. The community reaction to that was swift and decisively outraged against the Republican nationalist community for committing that murder. So things like that, and again, like I say, unsure how far the paramilitaries will push the ports and so on, because they need access to the narcotics. So for the moment, I think there's case for optimism that the backlash isn't coming anytime soon, and probably wouldn't be that severe. But like I say, just in general, across Ulster just now, the situation is just unparalleled. I think it'd be very difficult to predict which way it's going to go, but I think everybody should be wary, as always, of the situation in Northern Ireland.